In this interview, Local 514's host, Savannah Craig, sits down with Stephane Bilodeau to discuss the recent wildfires and tree planting as a solution to climate change. Together, they discuss the process through which wildfires happen, their health issues risks, and carbon storage.
Stefan, can you please just state your name and your position at McGill?
I'm Stephane Bilodeau. I'm a professor, adjunct professor at McGill University, the Department of Bioengineering. I'm also an independent contractor for the UN, so the United Nations Office of Project Services, and also a clean tech chief executive officer, so chief technology officer to be more accurate in clean technologies.
Thank you. In regards to the forest fires, generating such large amounts of CO2, is this kind of setting us back in terms of meeting carbon emission goals and climate goals in Canada and Quebec?
Absolutely, and it's probably even bigger than that. The European Union Copernicus Institute has released last week that up to now, the fires up north in Canada, essentially, but even on the east side, have generated more than 290 million tons of CO2. So just in the first 7 months of the year, it's even not the total that we'll get this year, and it's already well beyond what we've seen typically. And not only that, it's a big fraction of the total emissions caused by wildfires around the world right now. So we're definitely impacting air quality and also adding to the total CO2 emissions in the world in Canada, but it's also in the world right now.
Well, that's a terrifying number to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Could you explain to me a little bit about kind of the carbon that both trees and soil store, and how forest fires, take this carbon and emit it back into the air?
Yes, trees essentially, or plants in general, are kind of naturally capturing the CO2 because they are building their own structure from the CO2 essentially. And they are capturing this through the photosynthesis process. I will not get into the details, but when there is a fire, we're in fact kind of reversing the process. We're releasing the CO2 which was captured in the plant, in the trees, and whatever, and plants, and then it's kind of flushed away in the air. With the CO2, by the way, it releases also a lot of other contaminants, particles, many things that are impacting the air quality on top of the CO2. So the CO2 that is released is adding up, as I said earlier, to the man-made emissions. I would say directly man-made emissions, because as we know, these increasing wildfires getting bigger, getting more in terms of numbers of fires. In Canada, we set a record this year. So and in numbers of fire, but also in the surface, we're at 13 million hectares of forest that has been burned right now already. And this is bigger than Portugal, the whole country, or South Korea right now. So it's super huge. That's why it's impacting beyond Canada in terms of the impact. So this carbon which has been released is adding to what was directly man-made generated, meaning here burning fossil fuel essentially, and many other activities, but this is definitely one of the biggest CO2 emitters. But wildfires are not completely unrelated to human activities, because they're in part, and probably the biggest part, caused by the climate change, which is definitely ongoing right now in a big way. So this climate change cause droughts, cause higher temperatures, and all those things, plus many others, in fact, but these two main things are increasing the risk of wildfires. So while in fact, there's forest burning, it's still somewhat a man-made problem. So this is adding to burning fossil fuel, as I said, and other activities.
So I understand that forest fires, a small amount of forest fires, are a natural occurrence in our environment. But what is the difference between, natural forest fires and the rate of forest fires that we have now?
Forest fires, wildfires are a kind of part of the regeneration process in a forest. So I would say in normal way, in smaller amounts, they're helping the forest to regenerate itself. But when they're too big, when the surfaces that are covered are so wide and huge, such as what we're seeing right now, and such as what was seen, for example, in California a couple of years ago, or in Australia, we've seen similar huge forests. But we're, by the way, it's all those fires which are already huge at the time, they're smaller than what we see in Canada right now, just for you to know. But when these fires are that big, the forest has not a chance to regenerate. It has been burdened to the ground in so large on so large surfaces that this natural ongoing regeneration and then growth back it would be much more difficult. And if it's happening year after year, not necessarily at the level of what we see this year, but definitely the trend is going up right now. So if those fires in water extent are happening every year, then the forest might even stop regenerating itself if it happens too many times in a similar area. And when you burn the size of Portugal in Canadian forest, definitely in the following year you might see other episode of that happening in the same area. So that's another risk. Not only this year, it would be seeing super huge generation of CO2, but the following years, if the forest is not able to regenerate itself, this natural capturing process might not occur because the forest will not restart. In some areas, I would say, not everywhere, but in many areas that might happen because of the size and the importance of what we see right now.
Wow. Is there any way that, if natural regeneration can't occur, is there any way that humans can play a role in kind of making man-made regeneration through planting trees to a certain extent?
Planting trees is definitely a good idea. So there are two levels of what we can do. First, I would say as an urgent in an urgent recovery process, we can effectively replant trees, reorganize some spaces just to make sure that, in fact, one of the causes is droughts and the lack of water resources there. So there might be some work to be done there, or reducing, diverting water sources for whatever development that is undergoing. So that's the first, I would say, urgent fix. But on the long term, definitely the other solution is to reduce emitting carbon in itself. So because that is the very first cause of all this. So fires were existing before climate change. There will still be wildfires down the road. But right now it's the acceleration and the size, and the only way we can reduce that in a bigger way is to at least stop as much as possible emitting more fossil fuel. So that's the second level of things that men can do right now.
Okay. There's been in Montreal and other cities a big push to plant lots of trees. A little bit for carbon capture, but also specifically in Montreal, island cooling. In terms of planting trees here, how much can this regulate the air pollutants that we're receiving from forest fires in Quebec? And does there kind of have to be like bigger, larger efforts to kind of purify our air and make it a safe living space for us?
Trees are really good tools. Nature, in fact, built these tools along millions of years, so they're really optimized to take care of CO2 in the air, and also they're good at, as you said, reducing, or in fact, the extra heat that is occurring in cities because of all the cement, the asphalt, and all whatever construction we have. So trees helps on that front. On cleaning the air itself, it cleans the air because it reduces and it captures some of the pollutant, but not that much. You know, one of the biggest consequence on air quality of wildfires is the particles, the fine particles, what we call PM 2.5 according to regulation, whether it's the WHO guidelines or the air quality index we see in the weather forecasts and stuff like that. So these particles, which have been in science, which are the cause of most of the health issues with air quality, the tree itself cannot deal with it and cut these the amount of fine particles. So trees are good, and just don't take me wrong on that one. I'm absolutely pro planting trees because it's helping on so many fronts, especially on the CO2, but also on the temperature in city. But on air, the quality, we need to cut the problem at the source, or to have something that helps on the air quality itself. So whether it's filtration, proper filtration, not any filtration, because I might repeat it myself, but it's fine particles we're concerned about, and especially the PM 2.5, because they've been proven to increase hospitalization. You know, WHO, as well as a recent study, which was based on the big fires in California I was referring to a few years ago. So there was increase in hospitalization related to respiratory disease by 1.3 to 10%, 10% of hospitalization. That's huge in the whole state in these episodes. So we don't monitor that much in Canada or in Quebec right now, but I think with the months of fires that are happening right now, the many months, I think we'll see that happening in our hospitals. So to avoid those types of PM 2.5 additional risks, we need to properly filter the air in our homes, in our offices, in our schools. So that's definitely important. On top of adding, as you said, trees in our cities and even beyond. Trees needs to be added by the million, just not a few. It's huge, the amount of trees that needs to be planted. I'm not talking million of trees in Montreal, indeed. I'm talking about around Canada. But the point is, in cities, this is helpful, but it will not reduce the respiratory disease associated risks. That's the point.
The planting of trees won't reduce the risk of disease caused by forest.
Talking about short-term air quality issues, which are just today in Montreal, in Laval, in Trois-Rivières, the air quality index is between 130 and 150. So 100 AQI at 100 and 101 to be more accurate. It's for especially for vulnerable people. It's unhealthy. When you reach 150, it's for everybody that it is unhealthy. So that's the kind of things that causes the things I was referring to in California. In Montreal this very summer, we had something beyond 400 in AQI. You recall, you might have seen, we were even the worst big cities, amongst the big cities in the world for some time. Then it was other cities around, but even New York was affected by our wildfires. So these kind of air quality issues need to be dealt with more focused solutions like air filtration. So trees on the long term are really, really, really good, but for short-term episode, you need tools such as the filtration. And HEPA filters, if I can mention them, which are high efficiency particle filters, so they are able to capture these micron size fine particles. So it's why it's not any filter that can be used. It's really those who have this capacity.
Thank you. You mentioned health issues and hospitalization as a result of forest fires and poor air quality. Would you be able to, maybe specifically kind of get into how exactly or what kind of health issues people are getting as a result of all of this?
Indeed, disease like asthma are definitely directly linked to that, especially with wildfires, by the way. Wildfires were proven to be amongst the worst in terms of adding to the respiratory disease risks because of the fact that they're not only containing fine particles, but also other contaminants because of the wood burning. So you have emissions of other um, chemicals essentially. So on top of that, uh, the disease related to the lung, there are many, are definitely impacted by wildfires, uh, particles, I would say. But not only that, the study I was referring to was held in California and was specifically related to respiratory disease, pulmonary or lung associated disease. But there are other types of disease that are impacted as well. So the cardiac associated disease might be increased because of fine particles, so the impact it has on our respiratory system cause a secondary impact in other of our systems. So there are so many. So I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm doctor in engineering, so I would not get into the diagnosis of those, but I know they are linked with diabetes, with the heart, with lungs, and these are really the most known affected disease, but there are also many others. I would be pleased to give you some references if you'd like. So as I said, I'm not a medical doctor, so I will not get into this personally, but I can definitely refer to studies made by current MDs, and they are really relevant. And by the way, it's not for nothing that the WHO specifically said just a year and a half ago, and repeated it this every summer, that clean air is a right. It's a human right. It's not just for the sake of adding to human right. It's because that's necessary for life. It's a life support. Clean air is important. Not just air, not just breathing air, but breathing clean air. Air pollution coming from many sources, but wildfires being definitely one of the big source of air pollution.
Thank you. Yeah, if it's not too much trouble, I would love to see
I'll
those.
be pleased to share.
I just want to ask, do you think that a large contribution causing these forest fires are, our system, capitalism, the way we have our means of production, all these things? And can we not address forest fires without restructuring our economy and the waste that we cause?
Definitely, as I said, one of the root cause of wildfires right now, on top of the natural causes, but I'm talking about the increase in the wildfires, is definitely our CO2 emissions, man-made CO2 emissions. As I said earlier, the biggest production of CO2 emission is fossil fuel burning. And this is caused because of our appetite to um, uh, infinite growth essentially in our, so I don't know which part of our systems need to be changed, but the way we're burning fossil fuel need to be changed because it's sustainable. So you see on my screen, so sustainable goals are touching many things. It's small, but the point is touching things like poverty, on top of climate change, on top of food scarcity, and all those things are impacted by our emissions right now because food production is limited. Even inequalities are boosted because of the fact that our economy is too much tied to fossil fuel. And this fossil fuel that we're using to accelerate growth is causing the CO2 emission. So definitely, if we want to reduce and as soon as possible these risks, or at least stop increasing them, we need to reduce our fossil fuel use, and in a bigger way than what we're doing right now. We've not been so successful in the last 20, 30 years in reducing while we were aware that it was impacting. Now we see the consequences in a way that we cannot, even if we hide, if we close our eyes, we breathe the consequences of this climate change right now because of the wildfire. So we cannot hide that to ourselves right now. But for 25 years, we tried to do so as a society. But we need to do things, and we need to do things right now because it might be impossible to stop it if we go much further than where we are right now. We're in the decade of action from the United Nations right now, and we're not at the beginning. It started in 2020. We're almost next year we'll be halfway, and we need to have stringent actions and concrete actions done well before 2030, which is the end of this decade, and beyond, definitely. We cannot just do business as usual. That's essentially what I wanted to say.
Thank you so much. I just have one last question. I've noticed that some businesses have, pushed kind of selling products and saying, if you buy this from us, we'll plant this many trees. At the same time, they're not really changing the way in which they transport items. There's still express shipping from California to Canada or whatnot. Do you think that if we, kind of building on what you answered before, if we maintain our the way in which we produce items while kind of, saying we're going to plant a tree to balance, the carbon emissions, do you think that this is good enough?
That's a good question. The short answer is no, it's not good enough, but I can expand a bit on it. So we're no more at a time where we can continue to do the things we were doing and try to compensate it through other things. We need to do both. Yes, planting trees it's important. We need to do so, but it's not replacing the fact that we need to cut our emissions in other ways. Planting trees will help us, but if we continue to emit them, we're just kind of staying where we are, and we already see what happens right now. So we need to reduce. We cannot just keep it at the level we are right now. So compensating is not sufficient. We need, I would say, constructive action. So we need to build a better way to use. So transportation is an important point. Our food production, it's also something we need to optimize. It's really based on meat right now, and the level we are doing in the Western country, we're using meat in the Western country is unsustainable worldwide. So if the 8 billion people in the world would do the same thing as just a few countries on the western side of the globe, if it was done by everybody, we would definitely be in a super big trouble already. We start to see the trouble even with just a portion of the population doing it. So we need to reduce that because it's unfair to let some do things that are unacceptable and let the others live. So we need to do so. That was the longer version. The answer is no, we cannot continue that way. Planting trees, changing our process that are using fossil fuel, and also changing some of our ways, so that the way we're doing things, even the way we heat. That's what I meant. That will then in turn impact everything, from the climate change itself up to the wildfires that are increasing so much right now.
Thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to share or think is important for me to know or look into?
I think you came with really great question on the climate change. I just want to emphasize what I've said earlier. So wildfires are there, they are there to come back as well. So we have huge, a tough year. Doesn't mean next year will be as tough as this very year, but that's for sure that the overall trend will be increasing. So we need to prepare. And as I said, clean air is important. It's a life support fluid. We all need it. So, and we need to clean it as much as possible. So I just want to emphasize that people that want to care for their relatives, for their friends, for their family, needs to filter their air with proper tools. I was talking about HEPA filters. There are, even for those who want to build their own things, they can use DIY tools like the Corsi Rosenthal box, which were used during the pandemic. They can be used to filter air for wildfires as well. That this is important because it has a concrete and measured impact on the health of everybody. So it's the most vulnerable will be suffering the most, indeed, but everybody will be impacted by air quality, the level we've seen this summer.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure speaking and learning from you.